Hello, everyone, and welcome to Singularity One-on-One. Singularity One-on-One is a podcast feature of Singularity Weblog, where you can go and listen to it or download it in full. As you may already know, my name is Nicola, aka Socrates, and as always, I will be the man with the questions. Today, I'm privileged to have Ken Goffman, aka Sirius, as my guest on the show. RU is a writer, editor, and digital culture iconoclast. He was editor-in-chief of Mondo 2000, the popular and influential cyberpunk magazine of the early 1990s. More recently, he was editor-in-chief of the transhumanist magazine H+. He's also the author and co-author of numerous books, including A User's Guide to the New Edge, Through Mutations, Counterculture Through the Ages, and Designed for Dying, with Dr. Timothy Leary. He's written for Wired, Time Magazine, Esquire, Rolling Stone, and Boing Boing, among many other periodicals. According to his own admission, RU has been a musician, audio podcast host, lecturer, and minor irritant. He is soon launching a new website, tentatively titled Accelerator, and he's writing most of an open source history of Mondo 2000 magazine. So after this introduction, let me start by saying hi, RU, and welcome to Singularity One-on-One. It's great to have you on the show today.
Hi, Socrates. I've been waiting to meet you for thousands of years.
All right, so let's see how productive we can make our long-awaited meeting in that case. Let's start at the very beginning, thousands of years ago. And maybe you can share with us how did you get interested in advanced technology in general and in transhumanism issues in particular?
Well, I wasn't a science fiction freak when I was young, so I didn't really start on this path terribly early. In the late 1960s, during the blooming of counterculture movement and various social and political changes, there was a philosophy carried by some participants in the counterculture that machines and technology could replace most forms of alienating labor and end human scarcity, bringing forth a fairly utopian situation for human beings in which we would be at play in the gardens amongst what one poet, hippie poet Richard Brodiger, called the machines of loving grace. And I liked that vision because I was young and because it was convenient, so that I didn't have to base a philosophy on hard human struggle or anything bitter or difficult, either from a Marxist or Randian or whatever perspective. I could look forward to a future in which both having fun and doing well would merge together. So, I mean, it has been rather difficult to maintain that position over the long years. I think it's become much more complex than that. But what you found was, I joined a group called the Yippies, Youth International Party, in the early 1970s, a political sort of arm of the counterculture. And they started something called phone phreaking. Or they took phone phreaking under their bosom, or created a relationship with it, and they started a magazine called TAP, T-A-P, which is about phone phreaking and ripping off corporate credit cards and for telephone calls specifically, and the hacker movement grew out of that. And then, throughout the 70s, there was an element or an arm of the counterculture that was very sort of sci-fi, very technologically oriented. And I kind of followed along that area of intrigue until it became rather specific with the space colony movement of the 1970s, in which Stuart Brand, who had been part of a group called the Merry Pranksters, a bunch of people running around in a bus taking LSD and filming themselves in the mid 1960s. Stuart Brand, Timothy Leary, of course, very well known psychedelic spokesperson, and William S. Burroughs, the most corrosive of the beat writers, all became part of this movement to form space colonies, and Leary and Burroughs in particular adopting various sort of post-human points of view, which led into reading a little bit of science fiction, mostly sort of the dark paranoid stuff like Philip K. Dick, but still containing a lot of interesting ideas. I was enough influenced by all of this to decide to move from Rochester, New York, to Berkeley, California, under the belief that what was happening on the West Coast of the United States of America, and the computer revolution was just starting to gear up, and NASA was out here, all of the space types were out here, a lot of the more experimental scientists, physicists were out here, everybody was out here. So I actually came out here with the explicit intention of starting a magazine that would take ideas from new technology, what we called high tech back then. That was a popular phrase that isn't so common anymore, but take new technology and science and marry it in with some of the concerns of psychedelic culture and counterculture, and create a magazine out of that to reflect this thing, which I did find to be happening to quite an extent when I did get out here.
So at what point did you make the connection, either implicitly or explicitly, with transhumanism? Because those are a number of sort of technological interests, actually a very wide spectrum of them. And at what point did you move to the sort of cyberpunk and potentially, I don't know, extropian or transhumanist idea?
Well, sometime around, I think it was 1974, an article appeared about Timothy Leary having just gotten out of jail in a rock and roll magazine called Crawdaddy. And in that article, he advocated something called SMILE, SMI²LE, and that was space migration, intelligence increase, and life extension. Despite or much of the consternation of the sort of punk rocker types that I was hanging out with, early punk rock, New York City style, this resonated with me. So in some sense, that started right there. I proceeded to read all of his future history series as it came out, which delved into some of these ideas and some ideas about how technology could open up circuits in the brain that human neurology somehow corresponded to the advance of technology and so forth. So there was all that. I don't think I did read FMS Fondieri very close to that time. I don't remember how I bumped into him, but I read his books. I think one was called Telespheres. I can't remember the names of the others, but they were all influences on what would eventually become transhumanism. There was an Alan Harrington book, The Immortalist, which I read, and sometime in the late 70s, Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw, inveterate vitamin, nutrient, and drug experimenters, released their life extension handbook. So all of that kind of came together into a rich stew for my imagination. So I don't recall people calling themselves transhumanists. I don't remember when that phrase or that term became familiar to me. So that I don't know.
Well, let me see if I can connect this at a little bit more personal level to you. Was that also about the same time that you decide to change your name from Ken Goffman to Are You Serious? And I'm trying to establish if there's any connection between the things you were going through, ideologically, sort of existentially, and the environment that you were part of, and sort of the changes that you decided to do with yourself and resulting, I guess, with the change of your name.
Yeah, well, actually, I was starting the first version of the magazine that would eventually become Mondo 2000, which is called High Frontiers, based on Gerard K. O'Neill's concept of space colonies that was popular in the 1970s, but also implicitly referencing High Times magazine, which is about psychedelics and smoking loads of pot. So, there's a kind of both those things together. And Are You Serious? R period, U period, SIRIUS really just came as a sort of quip, just came to the top of my mind. There was nothing serious about it. There's this wonderful writer who was an associate of Timothy Leary's, Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote wrote several books, but wrote one called Cosmic Trigger, in which he talked about various occult figures having contact or presumed contact. Robert is an agnostic, so he doesn't assume it to be true, but he wrote amusingly about people having contact with beings from the dog star Sirius. So I just popped up with the name. It's an open invitation to alien contact, because I'm asking the question, and if they want to, here I am. They can reply yes in a convincing manner at any time. So far, no word from anybody. So
it could also be interpreted as a sort of theistic question about God. Are you serious? And here I am. You can show or demonstrate yourself in front of me at any moment. But let me ask you, do the R and U stand for anything in that part? Are you serious?
No, well, I never did. But in a interview for a website dedicated to Alan Moore, who did Watchmen, et cetera, I said it was Reginald Ubermensch. And of course, my devotion to Elton John, I guess, I don't know, but his first name was Reginald. Not really. I have no devotion to Elton John. Although Benny and the Jets was a great song. Anyway.
Very interesting. So let me see. Okay, so you're going through all those changes. You're going through those very interesting times. You're meeting all those kinds of people. You change your name. What's the impact or the identity that you develop as a result of all this? In other words, what I'm trying to find out is, who is Are You Serious then? Are you a writer in your own words? Are you a writer? Are you a philosopher? Are you a musician? Are you a transhumanist? Are you a counterculture or cyberpunk icon? Who are you?
Well, much like the name, I'm a question waiting to be answered. I try to stay away from getting boxed in by any particular label. I do make my livelihood primarily as a writer and an editor, and occasionally as a public speaker, which is something I actually probably enjoy most of all, but don't get as much opportunity to do. So that's part of the identity. Very early on when I took the name, it was a period of incredible fun and playfulness, and there were hippies and yippies. We were quippies. It was a time of really just messing with people's heads in a very fun and gentle way, and that became the identity of Are You Serious? Towards the middle of the 90s, after the breakup of Mondo 2000, the Are You Serious character darkened a little bit and became perhaps a cross between the Marquis de Sade and Timothy Leary or something like that, and wrote a book, How to Mutate and Take Over the World, which in some ways reflects that darkness, but also continuing to be a prankster in all aspects, and put together an album with a band called Mondo Vanilli, which is just going to get released next week. It was done in 1993, but because of complications with the record label, it never came out. So that reflected that period. Sometime in the late 90s, my friends started calling me Ken Goffman. And so Are You Serious sort of became this character that I use in public that I'm identified with as a writer and a speaker, but became less of personal identity. I mean, for a while, I got lost in Are You Serious?
Mm-hmm.
I was Are You Serious?
So, what is the motivation behind your public speaking, your writing, your music? Is it what's the motivation behind it?
Well, I mean, there are multiple motivations behind everything I do. I mean, first of all, I have to make a livelihood, so I have to, I have to sell what I can to someone who will pay for it, and so that is part of the motivation. I mean, other than that, um, it's really to try to bring about a lively discourse and to amuse people, and to explore ideas that I find interesting. Not to a great extent, it's not to uh, advocate causes so much as it is to explore what the possibilities are and how we think about things. Occasionally, I go on a political rampage for a little while, and I'll try to become an advocate. I formed something called the Revolution Party in 1999 and ran a write-in candidacy for president, and put together a 15-point platform for how to transform America, which was a combination of liberal and libertarian ideas that people liked quite a bit, actually. And recently I put out a message suggesting that people form an open source party, which became the International Open Source Party, which mostly isn't me. It's not something that I feel extremely prepared to speak about, other than sort of the vague idea that politics should be transparent. I just lost you there. Okay, yeah, politics should be transparent. That there should be some type of democratized participation, and that in general that we are moving towards a world in which the main types of activity, the main economic and social value will probably or will hopefully be what I call voluntary collaborationism. So that rather than most people's activities being motivated by profit or being motivated by the coercion of the state, most activities will be motivated by a desire within people to be part of a process that brings, with a group of people where they create something or make something interesting or valuable or fun or whatever.
Part of the reason why I asked this question was because you've been associated for a very long time with the counterculture of the 80s and the 90s. And I was trying to just figure out if the counterculture or being a sort of a contrarian is the motivation and the starting point, or if that's the effect that you end up with.
Yeah, probably a little of both. And one of the things is whenever I become sort of part of a group or a way of thinking, I have to start experiencing doubt about some aspects of that way of thinking, or I have to have moments where I see how this can be ridiculed.
I think it was Mark Twain who said that whenever I find myself on the side of the majority, I find it is time to stop and reflect.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. But I mean, even like, I was very much influenced by Timothy Leary. I immediately started making some fun of Timothy Leary, which he seemed to appreciate, and so forth. So, yeah, I have this sense that, I mean, the way most people present themselves in public is that they have this idea. and this is who they are. And when they wake up in the morning and when they go to sleep at night, and for all the 14, 16 hours, 17 hours that they're awake during the day, this is who they are. And I doubt that. Maybe it's true for them. And if it's true for them, I find it strange personally. So I'm a lot of different peoples during the day. And particularly, when I go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning, I doubt everything. And I'm sort of in some ways a blank slate, a slightly nihilistic blank slate. And then from there, because I need to act, because there's stuff to do, I can begin to conjure up stuff that's worth trying to illuminate or question or whatever. So anyway, that's part of my personality.
That's very interesting, because I recently interviewed Max Moore, who is another very notable extropian and transhumanist, and his single message at the end of our interview was question everything.
Yeah, I'm with Max on that.
Okay, so let's try and see if we can connect your own identity, however fluid it may be, to the general sort of counterculture stream of the 80s and the 90s. So perhaps it's best to start first with what is counterculture anyway? Is there such a thing as counterculture?
I don't know if there is such a thing as counterculture anymore, because I don't think, counterculture has to exist in contrast with the mainstream culture. And things have changed so fast, and sort of the rules for behavior, the ideologies behind at least most of Western culture have become very hard to pin down themselves. So we're in a situation, a sort of postmodern situation with Western society and Western culture, in which there's no grounding within which to find a mainstream against which to rebel against, except perhaps the value of money. That would be something that pretty much has to be recognized by everybody as a survival mechanism. But I think that I wrote a book actually with Dan Joy called Counterculture Through the Ages, From Abraham to Acid House, and we defined countercultures as cultures that in a meaningful way transgress the norms of whatever the culture is of their times, and we define them as anti-authoritarian cultures that are also antic, that are playful, that have a certain sense that it can be fun to be a little bit subversive, so that's kind of, and that definition of counterculture can easily be challenged. We chose, Dan Joy and myself, my co-author, chose to define counterculture in terms of how Westerners perceived counterculture at that point in time, which is something that they associated with a beatnik movement, a hippie movement, punk movement, and all these anti-authoritarian cultures. Now, if you want to literally take the term counterculture very literal and just say that it's counter to the prevailing culture of that time, as I wrote in the book, there was a fundamentalist Christian group who, when I actually did a Google search for counterculture when I was writing the book, the first thing that came up was a fundamentalist Christian group who considered themselves counterculture because the mainstream culture, supported. It's the word I'm looking for. Did not support their values, allowed abortion, allowed free speech, allowed all kinds of vulgar expressions of sexuality and so forth, all these things that they oppose. So from their point of view, they were a counterculture, and that can also be a valid way of looking at the word.
Mm-hmm. So where about in that real or imaginary counterculture does transhumanism fit?
I'm not sure that it does. I mean, first of all, as I said, I'm not sure if we have countercultures today. I mean, I think there are elements of transhumanism that are very mainstream. I think Forbes magazine has now started a column that is largely transhumanist. I think it fits in with the desires of a lot of people who are in the business community, which may be mainstream. However, we define mainstream. Again, it's hard to locate a mainstream. There are television shows, news programs, speak very approvingly of these future potentials, whereas most hippies are probably very suspicious of it. But I mean, there are a lot of various elements within transhumanism, and there are a lot of people who are influenced by those countercultural times. There are people who are influenced by psychedelic experience. There are, your anarchists. I think, I mean, in some ways, the idea of open source, the idea of everything, making everything transparent and trying to engage people, as I said before, in projects on a voluntary basis because they're fun, because, that this merger of play with work, I think, is a sort of countercultural trope that is very lively and in some sense, the citizen scientist arm of transhumanism, or the what's the word I'm looking for, the DIY bio movement might be seen as a very countercultural thing. And it doesn't matter what the people behave like; they don't have to behave, like hipsters or whatever. What's counterculture is, DIY with technology, which was really a good definition of what cyberpunk was.
Mm-hmm. You've kind of preempted my next couple of questions, so let me just backtrack a bit and then see if I can bring it back. So let's just start with your definition of what transhumanism is, perhaps the best starting point.
Well, I take it, I think the way it's meant, which is human enhancement, through technology and science, being able to do things that we were not able to do, in our original biological model, and not just say get a pair of glasses to allow ourselves to see normally, but things that actually, expand what was possible for a human being before. So, I mean, if I had X-ray specs, if my glasses could see through the wall, it would be a transhumanist technology by today's standards.
Like Molly, for example, from Neuromancer, she had those goggles surgically embedded in her eyes where she could see in the dark and so on and so on.
Right. So when you see people getting prosthetic legs that allow them to run faster than most people, that would be a transhumanist enhancement. So, I mean, and expands out to all the favored tropes that are spoken of by most transhumanists of expanded lifespan, more importantly, of expanded health span, of greater intelligence, whether that's achieved with our own equipment or with some interaction with artificial intelligence, general artificial intelligence, what have you, et cetera. So that's what I accept its meaning to be.
So in that sense, let's go back to your previous point. You do seem to be thinking that transhumanism is kind of coming mainstream, say in the first decade of the 21st century. And that seems to be kind of rather different than the situation in, say, late 80s or early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty, these ideas were pretty obscure in the 80s and 90s, and they were associated largely with cyberpunk, I think, in the public imagination. I mean, if you went around like I did, I toured the country on the United States on behalf of the book A User's Guide to the New Age. And, if I would go on radio or TV or whatever, mostly they would be familiar with these ideas. This was pre-Wired magazine. They were familiar with these ideas if they were in touch with science fiction culture, if they were in touch with cyberpunk, and then if they were in touch with learning about some developments that were taking place in actuality. But it was pretty obscure. I mean, Eric Drexler's ideas were going around about the nanotechnology within some sectors of the scientific community. People who read pop science magazines may have heard a little bit about it. But I think you just see more of it, and you hear more about it today in mass media. You find more people familiar with these ideas and comfortable with it, or uncomfortable with it, but with a sense that there's an inevitability that some of these things will happen, that some of these things are plausible. And Barbara Walters had a special on Will You Live to Be, I can't remember, 150 or whatever.
So, normatively speaking, do you think that's a positive development, a negative development? Do you think that something's being lost in that sort of coming up in the open, or do you think something is being gained?
Well, no, I think anytime you have information and ideas spreading and being made more accessible to more people, however those people choose to access those ideas, whether it's through a television show or through the net or whatever, that's on the whole a very good thing. It's a good thing for people to learn about and be thinking about, and can only be helpful. I think, in terms of, not having it be our special little subculture, I never really cared for that kind of thinking. All the people who were like part of punk who became upset when their bands became popular or whatever, I never interested me. I think that if people want to do something different with the ideas of transhumanism, you want to do something non-mainstream with it, want to do art that's not mainstream with it, want to do advocacy that's not mainstream with it, or against it for that matter, they have every opportunity to do that. So the fact that these ideas are spreading and being discussed, in a mainstream context, shouldn't have any impact on that.
It's been a few years since I read William Gibson's classic Neuromancer.
Yeah, me too.
In the last week or so, I actually decided to take some mental time off, and I went and read the second and the third part of the trilogy, Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive.
Right.
And one of the things that sort of came back to me was the sort of dark prevalence of all kinds of drugs throughout his books, and his heroes generally, all of them using all kinds of different drugs. So let me ask you, first of all, how much do you think that William Gibson's Neuromancer sort of inspired the cyberpunk culture of the 80s and the 90s? And then the second issue is, what do you think is the relationship between psychedelic drugs and transhumanism, and should there be one?
Okay, well, Gibson, I think, was reflecting a culture that was already around him. When he wrote Neuromancer, I think he was quoted as saying he went into some kind of a place where a lot of kids were playing video games while listening to their Walkmans through headphones. And just from that small image of all these young people sort of being absorbed in a sort of very raw virtual world, he could imagine young people being absorbed in a much more elaborate, construct, cyberspace and so forth. And youth culture and young adult culture in the 1980s was a drug culture. Perhaps to a certain extent, it still is. So, he was just reflecting that, and reflecting the idea that, there was sort of the official corporate culture, and then there's a culture in which most young people participate, which is, drugs and nightclubs and, sort of on somewhere on the border or boundary between outlawdom or criminality and normal life and so forth. So he was reflecting those things. I mean, Neuromancer and that trilogy influenced a lot of inventors, which sort of confounded Gibson because he had written a fairly dark series of novels. But a lot of virtual reality inventors came up to him and said, "Well, thank you so much. I'm inventing the world you imagined." And Gibson was very clear that he didn't think his novels were dystopian, but nor did he think they were utopian. But he was intrigued that the technology people were really influenced by it. The hacker culture, I mean, a hacker culture existed all along. People writing the software and also the crackers, the people sort of breaking into systems or whatever. Those cultures existed all along. The self-image of the people who were involved in that was probably mutated by cyberpunk, so that you could be a cool geek with a leather jacket and mirrored shades or whatever, and that started to infect music culture and club culture and all that. So there's kind of more of a give and take between the visions of William Gibson and also to some extent Bruce Sterling and John Shirley and a few other people, and the fact that sort of hipster club cultures and hacker cultures already existed and continued to exist. Now, with transhumanism, I think the theme is enhancement. And with psychedelic drugs, the theme is brain enhancement or perhaps life enhancement, in the sense that if you theoretically, or I think realistically, if you use these things well and don't overuse them and know what you're doing, you can bring about states within yourself that are a little bit more flexible, and you can find yourself enjoying life a little bit more. Also, a number of people have reported using small doses of psychedelics, particularly LSD, as a brain enhancement drug, and even in a linear sense, be more alert, sort of taking what we get from stimulants, but seems to give a little bit of a spin, adds a little bit of creativity to that punch. So let's see. I'm losing you. Are you seeing me?
I'm seeing you. I mean,
Okay.
there were a couple of interruptions, but overall, it's not too bad, I think.
Okay. I think I'm not sure how exactly it works. James Kent, who was the neuro columnist for H Plus Magazine, has written a book about how psychedelics work in the brain, called Psychedelic Information Theory. People can look that up if they're curious, and maybe learn a little bit about what the current science is with how these things work effectively. Of course, they all work differently. Psilocybin and LSD have different effects, but I think something is going on there with pattern recognition, enhanced pattern recognition sometimes, and distorted pattern recognition sometimes. I think that they seem to come together. So I mean, so you can get enhancement, or you can get distortion, in which you think you were, the Queen of Atlantis or whatever.
So do you think that in that sense, designer drugs or so-called smart drugs would inevitably be a part of the sort of transhumanist future?
Well, we don't really know. I mean, people are
Should they
experimenting.
be? Do you think they should be also?
Well, I mean,
so those are two questions.
They should be if we don't have something better. I mean, there's transmagnetic cranial stimulation. There's a possibility of photonic implants in the brain, so that we may, in the ingestion of a chemical through the, having it go into the stomach and then fan out from there is pretty sloppy. Of course, there'll be more precision drugs targeted to to the brain and so forth. So that might happen. But I mean, I think some sort of outside agent acting on the brain to speed it up a little bit, to be able to understand and integrate and see patterns in larger quantities of information is probably something that will be necessary for human beings. Now, of course, the singularity narrative, the singularitarian narrative, is that you could design artificial intelligences. You could basically reformat the brain outside of the brain, and then Kurzweil, certainly his view is that we would unite with these things and have them in ourselves, and we probably wouldn't require any drugs at this point. I mean, we might like psychedelic drugs still to get high, but as far as intelligence goes, we might not require drugs or other kinds of interventions.
You have this uncanny ability to sort of preempt the flow of my questions, because the next question I was just about to ask was about your take on the singularity as a concept, and perhaps you could elaborate even a little more on Ray Kurzweil's specific take on the singularity as sort of the most popular mainstream singularitarian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I have to say that I accept the idea of the singularity as it was initially intended by Werner Vinge, which is, some people will say, well, it's going to be a nanotechnology, a nano singularity, not an AI singularity. Or I know of somebody who I interviewed for my upcoming website who says it's going to be a social singularity, that kind of a Borg-like ultimate place of arrival, that our social connections have been increasing at our actually faster than Moore's law. So there'll be a social singularity. But I accept that it's artificial intelligence is what we're talking about when we talk about the singularity. And as someone who's not an expert in that area, I accept that I can't really make meaningful predictions or say whether this is these views there or whether this will happen or not. But I mean, I'm intrigued by it. I certainly enjoyed reading Kurzweil's version of it, and it seems like the doubling of information processing is continuing apace. So I'm intrigued by it. I think it's
but how likely
a fairly hopeful scenario.
How likely do you think that, in your view, that something like that could materialize in the next several decades, as Kurzweil has predicted, or ever for that purpose?
Yeah, I can only go by my own intuition, and that intuition is that it probably will happen, and probably take longer than optimists expect. I have this slogan that I adopted during the Mondo 2000 days, after dealing with very optimistic predictions by people like Timothy Leary and Arthur C. Clarke, where I said everything takes twice as long as you expect it to after you've already taken that into account.
Okay, so in that case, what do you think is our chance to survive any such potential technological singularity as a species, humanity in general, that is?
It's an interesting question. For a long time, I thought that people who were paranoid, if you will, about the bots coming and sort of killing us off, or winding up having an unpleasant response to us, I didn't feel realistic to me. I can only comment on this on the basis of intuition, but it felt to me as if in this process of evolving forward-looking technologies that help us to survive and live well, and to find new ways of gathering resources without doing too much damage to the home planet, that these things would resolve themselves. But I do think now um, that another intelligence that might exist outside ourselves, if they find themselves stuck on Earth, which is another question. They may not find themselves stuck on Earth. They find themselves stuck on Earth. They might look at us and say, "You guys are just too toxic. We're not going to be able to survive with you guys around. Answering your needs and desires." So.
So what do you think is the chance of that happening? Mathematically speaking, like more than 50%, less than 50?
I think it's less than 50%, because I think that probably by the time we get this dramatic event in artificial intelligence, we will also have figured out how to utilize molecular technology, and we'll have figured out how to gather natural energy, and we'll have figured out how to get our resources without continuing to ravage the home planet. And we may also have figured out how to start moving people out off of planet Earth. So I think it's relatively small, and really depends on the timing of a lot of developments and what happens first.
We're approaching the end of our interview today, so I'd like to ask you the two traditional questions that I ask of all my guests. First of all, what is the best place that our viewers and listeners can go and find more information about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, I mean, right now I don't have a personal website. So I can't really recommend anything more than going on Google and putting in R period, U period, SIRIUS, and ignore the guy who answers questions on Huffington Post. That's not me. That's some other person posing as "Are you serious?"
An imposter.
You can find an imposter. Exactly. There are a few of them around. I guess I have no more entitlement to own my name than Bob Jones or whomever. But you can find a lot of my more recent writing at H Plus Magazine, hplusmagazine.com. There's a site called 10 Zen Monkeys, which is the numeral 10 ZN Monkeys.com, that has a lot of fairly recent stuff by me. There's a Wikipedia page about me, which is generally accurate, although there's a lot of people questioning whether I actually exist on there or whatever. Of course, there's no proof. But that's about all I can offer right now. I don't have. People can send me email if they're interested in communicating with me personally, and I would prefer if that comes to the address Sirioso, SIRIOSO @yahoo.com.
Excellent. And if there's one message, a single message that you would like our listeners and viewers to take away from this interview with you, what would you like it to be?
I'm afraid Max Moore already stole my message. Question everything. Absolutely. Question everything every day.
Absolutely. Then, would you like to elaborate a little more on that, or?
Well, I have an article right now on H Plus Magazine, which, if I recall correctly, is "Question the Authority of Your Brain," and I think it is a fundamental question that some people seem to find banal, and I find completely poignant and important, which is the equipment that we have to understand the world and reality is just our brain. and to some extent our body and the environment and the cultural heritage that within which it exists, and the tools of measurement that we've invented. And it's presumed that this brain and this equipment is a biological accident. It may or may not be. So that everything that we understand and everything that we measure by using our brain is only as good as the quality of the hardware and software that nature, if you will, has allowed us to grow into.
That's fascinating. So on this note, I would like to thank Are You Sirius for taking his time to be here with us today on Singularity One-on-One. Thank you, Are You.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.